Hello friends, welcome to Ecoholics. Hello friends, welcome to Ecoholics YouTube channel. My name is Avinash Agarwal, and in this video I'll be discussing with you economics current affairs for 31st October as well as 1st November 2024. I had to cut short yesterday's lecture, so I intend to complete my discussion based on yesterday's articles. Again, a happy Diwali to those who will be celebrating Diwali today. And the idea is that two very good, very important articles are pending, are leftovers from yesterday's discussion. I would like to discuss the same with you. I have already discussed this first article related to fiscal health trends of states in India. If there is absolutely any doubts that you all have regarding the same, please feel free to ask in the comment section in the live chat section. I'll answer it there and then, right? So let us start with our discussion. Let us directly jump to the second article. Okay, so the second article is very beautiful article over here. It talks about what's happening to the informal sector of India, and it's a very important article because it does three things for you. First of all, it explains the meaning of the term informal sector to you, right? It explains the meaning of the term informal to you. Okay, so this is a very good theoretical, a very good academic discussion, a very short and sweet discussion, which will be very relevant for you when you are undertaking an answer writing kind of an exercise going ahead at any point of time, right? So that's the first aspect. Second aspect is that what have we done which has damaged the informal sector over the last 5-7 years. So we'll be looking at a couple of steps that were taken, not exactly to damage the informal sector, but the consequence have been that the informal sector has been damaged. And I will be sharing my own personal interpretation over here, what I feel has happened to the informal economy as well, based on my observations over the last 5 to 7 years. And thirdly, and this is the most important part, right, that the author goes on to say that meaningful data collection can help in informed policy making. Now, how do you go about doing this meaningful data collection? What are the 5 to 6 points that you should know, which you can use for data collection suggestions to, let us say, the government of India or government of any state, that they should look at in terms of informal sector? Because once you have rich data, then probably you can have better policy making. Finer and more sharper, more focused policies can be made, right? So these are the three things that this article will provide you. Okay, please remember that this is not a constructed general studies answer, right? So you will see that these points will come out, but they will come out in the through the story that the article is telling you. So you have to go through the story, understand the story, and be able to draw these points out. Okay, let me explain. Let me start my explanation to you for this particular article. So let's start. Okay, so see, what's happening is that the author has taken a dim view of certain decisions that were taken by government of India. When I say dim view, uh, so the idea that author is presenting to you is that demonetization of high value currency notes, this was done in 2016. So this was justified in the name of formalization. I don't know why this decision was taken, and I say this very responsibly. I don't know why demonetization was done, because goalpost or the objective of demonetization was evolved 3 or 4 times. So it was announced as a war on black money, but when we realized that okay, black money is not held in the form of cash much, rather it is held in the form of other assets, then we changed the goalpost. We said that the objective is formalization. Then when formalization was questioned, then the objective was changed to digitization of the currency, so on and so forth. So I will just leave this part as it is. The idea is that demonetization was done in 2016. Now the problem is that your chota mota informal sector, right, and I'm using the word chota mota with a lot of respect and responsibility. Typically your kirana stores doing, grocery selling over the counter, etc., stuff, selling variety of goods and services over the counter kind of stores, right? So they were dealing with cash. Okay, they were dealing with cash. Cash was king. है ना? And suddenly when for 2 months, 3 months cash was made scarce, so those guys got a jolt, and they are not having so much income, so much reserves and surpluses that they can, survive for 3 months, 4 months on low income, less income, and tide over it. Yeah, they will survive, sure, but their enterprise will be weakened. their activity will be weakened, their survival will be jeopardized. That is for sure. That goes without saying, right? Now, in all honesty, right, it was not demonetization which changed the behavior of my panwala. That my panwala started accepting GPay or Paytm. It was not demonetization that so my rickshawala in Mumbai started accepting cash not because demonetization was done in 2016. He started accepting cash because I started using GPay. And I didn't start using GPay because of demonetization. I started using GPay because when I realized that, oh, it is so convenient, I started using GPay. So this behavioral change of going towards a less cash economy was happening any which ways, right? So I don't want to bring demonetization into this conversation at all, right? So they are accepting cash, they are accepting GPay, which is absolutely fine. But the jolt of demonetization for those 2-3 months, that was definitely a negative, net negative, irrespective of what anybody may tell you, is what author is also telling you, right? Another aspect over here is the introduction of the goods and services tax. Okay, so again, the way the GST was introduced, so we got this. The author is saying this. My interpretation is that the author is explaining the concept of false positive. That we kept looking at GST, we kept looking at GST numbers. Like what is it? What were the numbers that we were looking at? So we were looking at the growth in GST registration. We were looking at the GST numbers in the sense that the number of companies registered under GST, and we started declaring that okay, informal sector enterprises are formalizing. Informal sector enterprises are formalizing. Is this relevant? Is this true? Is this possible? Does this make sense? This is what we will question now, right? Again, taking a step back, when we introduced GST, so how did we start linking it with formalization? We said that with formalization, there will be improved productivity, there will be secure employment, there will be higher tax revenue, right? But you have to understand that this happens naturally, that as a firm passes from being an informal sector enterprise to a formal sector enterprise, as it grows larger, right, as it develops specializations and division of labor, so productivity improves, security of employment improves, and so on. So it's a natural transition. If I'm forcing if I'm forcing firms to formalize for the sake of formalization, that will not necessarily result into higher productivity, higher security, and higher tax revenues, only if they have been pushed towards adopting. We need to segregate these things away from each other. We need to understand what's the problem over here in this argument. Okay, so the idea is that these are the benefits of having a large formal sector or having formal sector enterprises. But this does not mean that implementing a GST and having some firms convert from informal to formal will directly result into these benefits for you, higher productivity and so on. These benefits will come when there is a natural progression, there is natural growth in those informal sector enterprises. Having said that, right, the idea is that government of India and some of its supporters, they claimed that we are purging the Indian economy of undesirable informal elements and we are moving towards greater formalization. This is author's interpretation, right? Now the idea over here is that whatever the increase in number of GST incorporated enterprises is, right? So new firms are getting created and there are old informal firms, right? There are old informal firms and there are new formal firms. So these new formal firms are getting created on their own as well, and this number will also be helped by old firms, old informal firms getting converted into formal firms, right? So there are two sources of growth for the number of GST registered enterprises. One is the natural increase or the increase in new enterprises which would have happened on its own, right? And the other is where old informal firms are transitioning into new formal firms. But we don't have that kind of disaggregated data to tell us which stream, whether it is stream A, which is the natural stream of creation of new enterprises, right, or stream B, which is conversion of old firms into new firms. We don't have that kind of disaggregated data, right? So yes, there would have been a usual growth of corporate enterprises, and then there would be a shift of informal enterprises to the formal sector. But we don't know that for this total number of firms registered under the GST, we don't know how many of the existing informal enterprises got converted into new formal enterprises. We don't have that kind of data. The data that we have is the survey of unincorporated enterprises. And this survey tells us, if not anything else, this survey tells us that 63% of unincorporated enterprises in the country, they were not registered. This is the data for 20 to 23. 63% of the unincorporated enterprises, they were not registered. In 2015-16, when the same survey was done, they said that 69% of the unincorporated enterprises were found to be unregistered. So what is the decline? Right, from 69% to 63%, it's a marginal decline. By any stretch of imagination, this is a marginal decline, is what the author is saying. So the idea that GST was done so that formalization will be enhanced and will be catalyzed, and saying that yes, GST was successful in that regard, it's a questionable outcome, right? It's a questionable outcome. So this data at least doesn't tell you that we have been able to massively formalize the informal sector. And if you look at logical arguments as presented by Ajit Ranade and Kiran Limaye, right? Please understand that as a panwala, when I am selling my stuff to you, right? I'm selling directly to consumers. So I'm not going to get any input tax credit. Since I'm selling directly to the consumer, I'm not getting any input tax credit. So whatever tax that I pay, right, I'm not going to get it back. I cannot file for an input tax credit. Because what is the objective of GST? The objective of GST is to collect tax from the end consumer. And if I am the last panwala sitting over here and I'm selling directly to the consumer, so whatever the tax that the consumer pays to me and I pay to the government is not going to give it back to me. They are going to keep it with themselves. So I have paid an input tax. I have paid a tax on my inputs to, let us say, whoever was selling over here, right? So I have paid that. Whatever money that I collect from consumer will be credited to the government. So I'm not going to get anything back. I'm not going to get anything back, as a matter of fact. So the idea over here is that given the fact that micro enterprises which are selling directly to consumers, they have wafer thin margins, they will not be able to claim input tax credit, right? So it doesn't make any sense for them to enter into any kind of a GST framework. If they don't have to, if they have a choice, they will remain out of it. If they don't have a choice, if their turnovers are large enough, then they have to enter. They don't have a choice. But if their turnovers are not large enough, they will not enter. It doesn't make any sense for them, right? So who will enter? Only large unincorporated enterprises will enter into the GST registration framework because they will have to enter. They don't have a choice. These guys will not sell without GST, right? So they will force you. But chota mota enterprises will not enter. So if you are a large unincorporated enterprise, you will enter into the GST network. Otherwise, you will not. Which brings me to something which I have started thinking after I have read a couple of articles over here, that now it seems we have created a completely two-track economy which hardly interacts with each other. So there is this completely formal economy. It also incorporates those large informal enterprises that transformed themselves and became formal because of GST, right? Whatever those numbers are. So there is this one track over here. This is one track of your economy. And then there is a second track of your economy which comprises of smaller informal sector firms, right? Smaller informal sector firm. So they buy from the informal sector and they sell to the final consumer. Because I am not sure would any formal sector firm would want to, interact or cater to these smaller informal sector enterprises, given the fact that they are outside the GST network, given the fact that they would be dealing in cash, given the kind of jhamela that will involve, right? I don't know what will be the level of interaction. So my sense is that we have ended up creating a perfectly two-track system over here. One track comprising of formal as well as erstwhile large informal sector enterprises that have turned formal, and the other one comprising of smaller informal sector enterprises. This is my understanding that I am developing over a period of time, right? We need to test this, right? Anyways, we need to move ahead, right? We are discussing the state of informal sector enterprises in India. Now, again, it is the government's survey which is telling us that the unincorporated enterprises का contribution to India's gross value added is lower in 22-23 than it was in 2010-2011, right? So there is this declining share, there is this shrinking share of informal sector. Now it would be premature to conclude that it's a shrinking share because firms have transitioned from being informal to formal. Hence the informal sector ka the contribution is going down. This would be a very simplistic, a very wishful way of concluding things. That हाँ ठीक है चलो GST is successful, demonetization is successful, so hence the share of informal sector enterprises has fallen. Congratulations. If you want to go down that line, be my guest, right? But the author wants to present to you an alternative, and that alternative is that you will have to do an honest accounting of what is happening in the informal sector, and if you do that, what you will find, or what you are likely to find, is that there is a downgrade that has happened for the larger informal sector in terms of growth, in terms of value added, right? That their contribution has definitely come down because of these events, because of, and we have not even talked about COVID-19. We have not even talked about the K-shaped recovery that everybody is talking about. We have not even talked about any of these things, right? Anyways, so the problem is definitely there. Now let's solve the problem. Okay, let's understand what's happening. So see, informal sector is important still in India because of the amount of people who are working in the informal sector. I mean, given the fact that salaried jobs are scarce in India, so therefore this informal sector presents itself as a important security net, particularly in towns and cities, right, where people are migrating from rural areas for opportunities. In these towns and cities, this informal sector is playing a very important role, right? Now, you have to understand where did this term informal sector come from, right? So ILO created this term informal, or they created this classification informal in 1970s, and initially this classification was criticized, right? But over a period of time, this classification has gained a lot of acceptability, and academics, researchers, as well as policymakers have adopted this term informal sector or informal within within their language, within their body of work, right? Now when we speak about informal sector, we get two very different interpretations. One is that I am running an informal enterprise, not registering it, because I am doing something which is illegal. I'm doing something which is illicit. Like for example, if I'm drug trafficking, gun peddling, human trafficking. So it's not as that I'm going to go and apply for GST and go and ask for permission to do any of these nefarious acts of mine, right? So one is to escape the law, or let us say that I don't want to show the true extent of my profit. I don't want to show the true extent of my turnover. I intentionally want to steal taxes from the government. That is also basically escaping the law. So that's one kind of informal activity. Another kind of informal activity is what your street vendors are doing, right? Street vendor kind of characters are doing. That's just a survival activity. They don't want to escape the law, meet the law or anything. They just want to survive, right? So in that sense, informal sector is basically becoming a catch-all term, meaning that it's a very wide it's a very wide spectrum term. Whether I'm selling pakodas on the roadside of Mumbai Bandra or I'm peddling drugs on Mumbai Bandra, both are informal sector enterprises, but both are very different kind of enterprises, right? Now over a period of time, we have started referring to informal sector enterprises through a variety of different names. We call them shadow economy, we call them informal economy and whatnot, right? Now we need to have a distinction over here in our minds, right? Whatever is illicit or undesirable, we need to terminate those kinds of enterprises. People who are stealing taxes deliberately, people who are doing illegal activities, antisocial activities, these activities, these firms need to be eliminated immediately, right? So if I'm stealing taxes, I should be penalized and it should be made formal. If I'm doing other nefarious activities, obviously I should be closed down. Isme there is no doubt, right? But for those tiny enterprises which are basically being run by a single person for an honest living with the help of family members, for these enterprises we need to have a more relevant policy approach, right? For these enterprises we need to have a more relevant policy approach. we cannot club them and refer to them as a part of MSME. Because when we talk about MSME, so there are SMEs that are going within MSMEs, there are SMEs that are going for IPO, right? And they are getting listed. They are getting listed on the SME portal, right? So SMEs, MSMEs के अंदर there are billionaire kind of companies, ठीक है, बड़े बड़े कंपनीज है, अच्छे अच्छे कंपनीज है, एंड इन्हीं इसी MSME के अंदर माय पान वाला इज ऑल्सो कमिंग. So naturally this term MSME is also irrelevant. It's a very catch-all kind of term. It doesn't help in nuanced policy making, right? So that's what the author is saying, that this term MSME, it hides more than it reveals, right? What we need is that okay, SMEs की एक set of policies है उसको अलग करो, and micro enterprises की एक set of policies है उसको अलग करो, right? So the distinction cannot be more glaring between these two groups of firms. So SMEs, they have access to market, they have access to banks, formal credits and so on. But your micro enterprises, which are being run by individuals or which are being run by households, they often rely on friends and family to raise capital, to access market, etc. So again, your understanding of the term informal is clear through this discussion of 7-8 points that I did. That where did this term come from? What does this term mean? What does this term imply? Right? How are we using this term? What do we need to do in India so that we can better target these micro enterprises? Now, once we have understood that yes, we need to help the micro enterprises out, how do you exactly go about doing that? So the author is suggesting that we need timely and accurate data, for which MOSPI has already taken a step in the right direction. So earlier, the survey that I referred to in the first half of the article, so there is this survey of unincorporated enterprises that we were doing, and earlier this was a quinquennial survey. It was being done every 5 years, right? Now this will become an annual survey, so the availability of quality data will be better for us. It will be available on an annual basis. Secondly, what we can do is that since, like I said, that I have started using GPay, so my Panwala and Rickshawala and everybody else are also using a lot of, what should I say? Formal financial banking activities, right? They are also getting money in their bank accounts, etc., which they are withdrawing, right? So they are getting that money on a daily basis, withdrawing it, or I don't know what, on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whatever, right? So that means that there is a significant amount of data for these micro enterprises that is getting generated at the end of RBI, that is getting generated at the end of National Payment Corporation of India, right? So significant amount of data is there, right? We just need to be able to access that data, integrate that data, right? So MOSPI is doing its bit, RBI and PCI are doing their bit. Let us combine the data together, right? Apart from that, ultimately it is the state governments. They are also having statistical bureaus, or they should have statistical bureaus. So as a matter of fact, the Finance Commission as well as the Niti Aayog, right? They are prodding the state governments to strengthen their statistical bureaus, because if we have strong statistical bureaus at the union level, at the state level, at the district level, and I would dare say at even lower than the district level, that would be helpful. Because if we don't know what is happening in our country, then we don't know how to govern the country. And it's not a man management exercise anymore, because a lot of data can be digitally collected, provided you know what you want to collect, right? So your state level statistical bureaus, they also need to be looped into this exercise, so that your coverage and your accuracy of what's happening at the individual state level, that accuracy will improve, provided you have eyes and ears on the ground. Now, you cannot have eyes and ears on the ground because MOSPI wants to do it. You can have eyes and ears on the ground because the state is aligned, right? Using all of this data and everything, you should be able to launch your quick assessment surveys, right? You should also use some non-conventional data gathering tools, but what those can be, the author has not elaborated, so I will also not elaborate, right? There should be a collaboration with the research community, because they are the ones who are doing this full time, who can benchmark against the best global practices and do it in a bipartisan manner, right? Do it in a fair manner, right? And hence you'll develop a richer understanding of what's happening to this sector. Hence, you'll be able to map the household economy, the informal economy, right? Take the right policy directions to help them out appropriately. Like for example, recently, Government of India took this very beautiful step of trying to help out the street vendors by providing them access to formal finance. So by every stretch of imagination, it seems to be a step in the right direction. Okay, not speaking about what kind of defaults are there on those loans, whether that is becoming a new non-performing asset problem in the banking system or not. Not touching that issue right now, but that seems to be a step in the right direction, right? So this is my entire discussion on the informal sector. I have taken my own very sweet time to discuss this article with you guys. I have taken my own very sweet time to discuss this article with you, because sometimes these articles come which are exactly the kind of articles that I want to deal with on a daily basis. Obviously, I don't get these kinds of articles on a daily basis. I don't even go looking for them because I rely on one newspaper to do its job well, right? So this is the question that I want you to try and address, right? That evaluate the challenges in formalizing the informal sector in India. How can accurate data collection help shape effective policies for informal enterprise, right? Try to answer this question. Try to make sure that you are taking down the notes of these articles, these discussions in a systematic manner. Your note making should be as per your syllabus, whatever your syllabus is, whichever exam you are preparing for, right? Moving to the third article, right? Now this third article is more of a cheerleader kind of an article, right? Which doesn't mean that it's not true, but I'm telling you before I start that it's a cheerleader kind of an article. It'll tell you everything that is going right in the Indian economy, which is always fine, right? So apparently, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, they have come out with their mid-year macroeconomic review, which is understandable because 6 months are gone. So April, May, June, July, August, September are already over. So 6 months are gone, more than 6 months are gone. So the mid-year macroeconomic review is out, right? So what does this say? So we are forecasting that our growth will be around 6.9 to 7.1%, which is not surprising at all, because IMF is saying that India will grow at 7%, World Bank is saying that India will grow at 7%, and RBI will say that India is growing at 7.2%, right? So growing at around 7% in 24-25, that's fine, right? Apart from this, we had already enjoyed a growth of 7% in 22-23. We enjoyed an 8.2% in 23-24. So what the author is trying to imply over here is that be happy, be thankful that you grew at 7%, then you again grew at 8% plus, then you are now again expected to grow at 7%, meaning that year on year, your growth is able to sustain itself and the denominator is getting larger in every year, right? So if let's say the denominator was 100 over here hypothetically, so 100 growing 7% becomes 107, which grew at 8%, right? So that's at least, let's add 9 over here. So this becomes 116. Now 116 growing at 7%, right? Then probably, that adds another 9, another 9 over here or another 10 over here, right? So this becomes close to 124 or 125, right? So what that typically means is that over this 3-year period, you have added 25% to your economy, broadly speaking. I'm just putting some rough numbers out there to make my point obvious to you, right? So that's what the author will basically try to imply to you, right? So yes, congratulations to ourselves. We are back on the high growth path, right? And honest assessment over here is that the deceleration and growth started not with pandemic, but it started much before the pandemic, right? So, and ultimately, of course, the pandemic kind of intensified the slowdown in those months. So the growth deceleration started in 2017-18, right? Repeated shocks are not being addressed openly over here in this article. So we know the repeated shocks, demonetization, then implementation of GST, and then pandemic, right? So the deceleration in growth started, and now we are back to the high growth path that prevailed before the steps were taken, right? There is some growth moderation in the first quarter. We can leave that be, right? There is a large trade deficit. There is a contraction in government consumption, okay? Because there was this election code of conduct, so everything came to a moderate speed. Now लार्ज ट्रेड डेफिसिट है उसका हम ज़्यादा कुछ कर नहीं सकते, बिकॉज एक्सपोर्ट का डिमांड इज वीक, इम्पोर्ट का डिमांड इज स्ट्रॉन्ग बिकॉज our production is growing at a decent clip, our factories are producing, so we need raw materials, we need intermediate goods. So import is not going to come down easily, export is not, firing on all the cylinders, so the trade deficit is understandable. Government consumption is also restrained, that is also understandable, right? Supply side के ऊपर बात करें, so there is a contraction in mining and electricity, there is a slowdown in construction, capital goods, consumer durables, tourism, travel and financial services, right? So there is a contraction over here. ठीक है, let's leave that be. Headline inflation, good news again. Headline inflation, it fell below 4% in August, right? But it has increased again in September. So let's see what the trend looks like going ahead. We are having this annual inflation forecast at 4.3%, which is looking quite benign. RBI is looking at a forecast of 4.5%, which is again quite benign. We are looking at the annual forecast, right? So the forecasts are benign, right? Upside risks are always there. They have always been there, which is food prices can play, naughty. So upside risks are always there, right? There is no denial of that, right? Our growth performance, our high growth performance is despite the fact that we are in a very fragile external environment. Again, this is kudos to us, right? So we are the world's fastest growing major economy. Again, kudos to us, right? So the idea is that we are having a surplus in services. What do I mean by surplus in services? That we export a way more than we import. So our earnings through services export is way more than our expenditure on service imports, but we are importing way more than we export when it comes to goods. So this is goods and this is services, right? तो इधर जो भी surplus है, right, और यहाँ पर जो deficit है, they kind of balance each other out or they offset each other, right? We are having, if you forget what happened in September 2024 and in October 2024, we are having large financial inflows, right? So our foreign stock exchange, our foreign exchange reserves, they are sitting at a tidy sum of 700 billion plus, right? So if there is such a huge inflow of foreign currency into your country, theoretically speaking, your foreign exchange rate should appreciate. But our foreign exchange rate has not appreciated because RBI keeps intervening in the market. What does this mean? So given the fact that there is a huge inflow of foreign exchange or huge inflow of dollars into India, so dollars should become cheaper in India, meaning that your currency should appreciate. But RBI doesn't let that happen so easily. Why? Because what RBI is doing is that it is simultaneously buying dollars from the market, keeping the prices of dollars up, or it can run a sterilization campaign where whatever extra cash in INR, in rupee terms, that RBI was forced to release because of inflow of dollars, so it is mopping those rupees up, right? But it is RBI's timely intervention in the market by buying the dollars in the market, right, which is keeping the appreciation ka pressure contained. Rupee is not appreciating and the dollar ka value is holding, right? Our nominal exchange rate, it has remained mostly flat. Our real effective exchange rate has depreciated a little. This will be helpful for our exporters. It should be helpful for our exporters, right? Monetary policy front. So we move from an expansionary stance to, let us say, a withdrawal of accommodation stance. So we adopted an expansionary stance in the post-pandemic phase. We kept the repo rate low at 4% for a very long period of time. Why? To stimulate demand, to stimulate consumption. And gradually we shifted to withdrawal of accommodation, meaning that we started increasing the interest rate gradually. Eventually we increased the interest rate by 250 basis point, meaning 2.5%. We got the interest rate up to 6.5%, right? And we held it at 6.5% for a longish period of time. Why? To contain inflation in India, right? RBI is very clear in its mandate on inflation. To contain inflation in India, we maintained the interest rate high at 6.5%, So uske through we got the inflation under control, right? We got it down to 4% in August 2024, right? And since then, and abhi ke beech mein RBI has accepted that yes, now we need to start relaxing the war on inflation, right? So though the repo rate is still at 6.5%, RBI is saying that we are taking a neutral stance in the sense that we are not trying to suck the liquidity out of the system anymore, right? We are not sucking the liquidity out of the system anymore, right? So that's what the idea over here is, right? Apart from that, credit growth has been slow for banks. The credit deposit gap is also large for banks. So these are some concerns. Deposit growth is not happening. It is trailing the credit growth, right? Why is deposit growth slow? Because there are multiple reasons and we have discussed this elsewhere in our discussions. So deposit growth for banks is slow because of A, the banks are not offering a very fantastic FD rate, RD rate to you. And B, mutual fund sahi hai for 10 years we have been hearing. So this new generation of workers who are entering into the workforce, they don't earn to FD the money like their parents did. They earn money to invest it in the market so that they can see the magic of compounding in their present lives. So behavioral change, right? On the fiscal front, Government of India ka consolidation efforts are on the track, right? On the right track. So tax revenues for Government of India is buoyant. If you look at excise and customs duty, so you will see that yes, there the tax in the revenue increase is not great, but they are minor taxes as of now, right? Buoyant tax revenue, right? Meaning that tax revenue is good. There is a large increase in non-tax revenue, meaning that there is substantial transfer of surplus from RBI. Simultaneously, there is a compression of revenue expenditure because Government of India has been very, very disciplined, financially disciplined, right? Because of all of these things, we have been able to pen down a target of 4.9% for our fiscal deficit for the financial year 24-25. And looking at the track record of Nirmala Sitharaman, we are more likely to meet this target than miss this target, which is saying a lot, right? So despite the fact that Government of India has penned down a 17% increase in capital expenditure, still we have been able to pen down a very aggressive target for fiscal deficit. That means that we are lowering our borrowings even as we are increasing our capital expenditure. That means that the revenue expenditure is being very tightly monitored. It is being very tightly controlled, which is the right thing to do, right? Of course, you can criticize me. You can say that revenue expenditure means subsidy. So giving subsidy to the poorer section of the population makes sense. We should do that. I'm sure that the Government of India is doing the same through direct cash transfer and so on, right? Fiscal consolidation is occurring at the state level as well. We have already discussed this in our first discussion, so I can skip this part over here, right? If you look at the and this is overly optimistic. We have had a more realistic discussion yesterday, right? So you can probably skip this part. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio, right? So if you look at debt to GDP ratio for states, so that is around 27% of their combined GDP. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio of the center, that's around 55%. And if you look at the combined debt to GDP ratio, that is 80%, right? So this is well within the limits that 15th Finance Commission had recommended. There are countries across the world where this number is 180%. So if we are at 80%, there is no point worrying about it at all. There are problems. Problem is, thankfully, there are some problems which are getting discussed in this article. So high inequality, tardy employment growth, these are our problems, right? These are our problems. But again, the author is saying that this is because of the poor conditions of the informal employment, right? So it's not the poor condition of informal employment, it's the poor condition of the informal sector, right? And that is not going to change itself on its own, right? There are some mild improvements. I will leave these mild improvements for you. I would like to jump to the conclusion now, right? So the idea over here is that broadly the economy has done well, right? There is some justification on the employment numbers. You can read this on your own time, right? So this is my submission to you today, right? I believe my second article that I discussed, the of this particular document on informal sector, that is much more relevant, right? And this third article, like I said to you, that it's more of a cheerleader kind of an article, which gives you a sense of all the things that are going right. So which will be very helpful when you are writing answers. You have to show both sides of the coin, positive as well as the negative, be able to have a balanced narrative, find out challenges and try to address them in a structured and a systematic manner. This is my submission for today. We'll meet tomorrow again. Happy Diwali to all of you guys again. We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you so much. All the best and Jai Hind to all of you. Bye bye.